So hey everyone, Jordan Buckner here with Foodbevy and excited for you to join for today's conversation where we are going to be talking about hiring for CPG brands and everything that comes with it. We have three great panelists and my co-moderator as well leading this conversation. And just as a kind of heads up, we have brands who are at all different stages. And so by no means are we experts on the topic, but this is really just to start that conversation to help you understand as you begin to grow during those early stages, what does hiring look like? What does team structure look like? Opportunities and mistakes that are made along the way. So what I'd love to do to kick off is do a quick intro of everyone who is joining on the panel today, and we will then jump into some of the topics. So first, I'd like to introduce Tina Adolfsson, who is my co-moderator, who's with Simera. Tina, welcome. I'd love for you just to give a quick intro for those who don't know you, even though I know most do.
Absolutely. So for all of you who remember me from 4 years at Survey.com doing retail merchandising, I am now at Simera. Survey got acquired. And one of the things that we did right before we finished our integration was we grew from 50 to 350 people. What we realized is our business model for growth was something that other people wanted to know about and actually wanted to tap into. So we created Simera. It is a few of us from the old team, and it is a pleasure to be working with actually some of our old clients from Survey as our first and earliest. We recruit remote talent from Latin America for everybody. And it's just, for me, builds on what I think is true, which is great talent lives everywhere, and you should hire the best person regardless of location.
Excellent. Next up, I'd like to introduce Ibrahim Vasir. And so with our panelists, Ibrahim, I'd love for you just to give a quick overview of, 10 seconds on what Dozen Cousins is and your company size and the kind of company structure overall, if you're co-manufacturing or working with or self-manufacturing.
Yeah, so my name's Ibrahim Vasir. I'm the founder and CEO of A Dozen Cousins. We're a natural food brand that makes meals and side dishes that are inspired by Creole, Caribbean, and Latin American foods. We use contract manufacturing, have a relatively lean team, so 5 full-time employees, and we'll probably grow somewhere to 8 to 10 by the end of this year. And we're based in Los Angeles, California.
I'm Ayeshah with Mason-Dixie Foods. I'm the CEO and founder. And we are basically a frozen American comfort food brand, centering the plate around biscuits and biscuit sandwiches right now in the frozen breakfast aisle, but really looking at reinventing new American classics. So, been in business in CPG for about 7 years now, and we have a team of 28 and growing. So it's been a wild ride with the majority of those new team members onboarding in the last 18 months. So can definitely speak to fast hiring, but strategic hiring. So, and also a very proud member of Project Potluck, founding board member with Ibrahim.
Excellent. And Ayesha, are you self-manufacturing or do you have a contract manufacturer?
We are co-manufacturers.
Excellent. And the biscuit sandwiches are amazing as well. So fun fact, actually, I chose all the people who I use and eat all their products. And so Ibrahim, we have various beans, and my wife is her favorite, the refried bean, the pinto beans, and so we always keep that well stocked. And
they're the only beans I buy now. So
I know, right? And then my last favorite, I'm always drinking tea, is Dan Klein, who is the founder and co-founder and CEO of Tiesta Tea. Hey, Dan.
Hey, everyone. Thank you, Jordan. I really appreciate it today. I hope you guys are all doing well. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Tiesta Tea. We're based in Chicago, Illinois, started in 2010. Our focus is selling loose leaf tea products and related accessories. We have about 31 employees. We do mostly self-manufacture and distribute, and the rest is done overseas as far as the tea blending goes. And yeah, just living the good life and trying to grow and stay on top of everything.
Excellent. So for the rest of this conversation, we're really going to choose a roundtable format. I have a series of kind of topics I love to hit on with our founders to talk through. But for anyone who's listening in, if you have follow-up questions on anything our founders say, feel free to drop those in the chat, and I can ask those to our founders real time, and they can answer those on the spot. And so feel free to make use of that chat. Our first question that I want to get into is around what role did you first hire for? Because a lot of founders starting out, it's 1 or 2 or 3 co-founders, and then they get to a point where they kind of overextend themselves and they're like, okay, I need to hire, but do I hire in operations? Do I hire in sales? Like, how do I think about making that very first hire onto my team? And so maybe we'll start with Ibrahim, of how you kind of made that decision and what role that was.
Yeah, so first I'll give a little bit of context. I for the first 2 years of our business, was the only full-time employee at A Dozen Cousins. So you should know that I'm coming probably from one extreme in terms of talent strategy and talent approach. And so for me, my philosophy was pretty simple, which was, if I could do it myself, I did. Then if I could outsource, I would try to find, a freelancer, an agency, a part-timer. And then when we outgrew that, we would move then into a full-time hire. And so for me, that first hire was a sales director. We brought on a national sales director, and we had started working with brokers over the course of that 2-year period, and just reached a point where like the account management, the trade tracking, the meetings, the submissions, they were just more than I could manage from a bandwidth perspective. And so we brought on a sales director, and it ended up working out great. So I'll end there, but that was basically our philosophy.
So I'm curious how that went, because I ended up hiring in sales for some of our first part-time help as well. And I hear from advisors all the time is that the founder should be the one outselling. And it's hard to like view that same like passion in someone else as like a sales director. So when you kind of say the sales director, were they pitching for new business, or were they more so doing like current account management? How did you think about that, those responsibilities?
Yeah, I think about sales even to this day as kind of a 1-2 punch, right? So retailers and buyers, what they want to hear from the founder is your vision for the brand, why it exists, in some cases, why you believe that you're different from the competitive landscape. And I still do that for most of our sales meetings. What I think a dedicated salesperson brings to the table is a little more of the strategy, right? What should our trade approach be? Should we be 2 for $6? Should we be $3.99 every day? What months are right to promote in? When do we want to invest in end caps? Like there's a lot that goes into, I think, good account management and, retailer management beyond just the vision setting and the sell, like the getting in the door. And so I often think about my job as like, convincing the buyers that we're the right product to have on shelf. And then my sales team's job is to make sure that we maintain that distribution, that we grow it over time, and that we just have a healthy business.
I love that 1-2 punch. Ayeshah, how about you? What was the first role that you hired for?
So we hired a Swiss Army knife of type person because, I think the theory behind hiring is you should always hire for what you're not. And I think Ross and I were always naturally good salespeople. So we just didn't think that needed to be the priority, but it was everything else back of house, right? It was ordering support, logistics and freight support, in-store support, all that stuff was what we couldn't relieve ourselves to do. So we ended up finding, we recruited them out of our restaurant, and she's still here. So she's become an incredible asset to the company long-term, and she's probably our longest historical hire, who's grown into 3 different positions as well in the company, which is really rare for a startup, but really amazing too to watch. But I think it's always hiring for what you're not and what you don't like. I mean, that's the other thing. People, I think there's a lot of pressure around being a founder or needing to be good at everything or present in everything. And all you're doing is just damaging stuff because you're not doing it perfectly or not doing it right. Or even worse, you don't like doing it and people can see that energy, right? And they're like, well, that person's not even passionate about their company. Like, that's not a great image for recruiting purposes. It also, I think, proliferates the image that founders and CEOs are micromanagers and they can't let go, right? And that's not necessarily true. I think being honest with yourself about what you're really good at, what you like working on, focus on that and start giving away the other tasks to people that you can trust. I think over time too, as we grew the company, the most important side of the business that needed a lot of hands-on support and more real-time, full-time access and dedication was ops and finance. because it's just, you can never devote enough time to those two realms. So we started really filling in the gaps there, and only now I've really started looking at the sales and marketing side.
And Dan, how about for you?
You know, our first couple hires were strictly operational focused. I think you mentioned this, Jordan, but the founders tend to be pretty good salespeople, and so my co-founder Patrick and I, in those early years, I mean, we would just kind of hit the streets and sell. We started doing it in Chicago and then doing it in different areas of the country. And as we did that, you know, one of the most important things was, you know, you make a sale, you have to ship the product. You have to produce the product, you have to source the product, and then ship it, and then provide some level of customer service. And so we quickly realized that the number one thing that we did really, really need in those early days was just operational help. So our first hire was operations. Our second hire, kind of like at the same time, actually, was actually design and marketing. We were fortunate enough to find somebody through our kind of friend network that was a great designer, that was willing to work for pretty low cost and was willing to grow with us. And for both of those people, offered them options in the company, and then also just a small salary, and then quickly over time grew that over the course of several years. And yeah, if I were to do it again, I'd do the same thing. I think operations is just the most critical by far. But it was pretty nice having somebody on the ground level in terms of design and marketing, just so that we didn't have to outsource everything. And we could really control the brand, which I thought was really important, and we still find very important.
I love that. On to another topic kind of based on this, which I think is interesting, is the idea of how you welcome in new hires. And I know that Tina actually is highlighting some of the great work that Ayeshah was doing as well. So Tina, you want to kind of share kind of what you were thinking about around this topic?
Yeah, I mentioned to Jordan that when you join Mason-Dixie, the way that Ayeshah welcomes you on LinkedIn makes it seem like you just got invited to the coolest party on earth. And I love the way she does it. I love the way she does it authentically. She adds in so much detail on the person that you know that she knows them. And with, you know, you can tell that she's writing it with a big smile on her face. So would love for you to start with that and then go on to, you know, how do you welcome them? How do you onboard them? And how do you make sure that they are, you know, the right fit for your company?
Well, thank you. That was a really nice interlude. Yeah, I think, you know, increasingly, having been in business now for 7 years, you are nothing without your team. I mean, absolutely nothing. And I think it's kind of a sacrilege coming from big corporate. I hated just being another cog in the wheel. I hated not being touted, but once a year, if I was lucky, in a small meeting room because I did one project and I just did my job. They didn't even highlight the reason why it was bomb. It was just, I did my job, you know. So I hate that there's not a lot of spotlighting of that. So I decided to just change it. And I think in the quest of hiring, it's been such a valuable process because I've met incredible people, and sometimes I couldn't afford them, or sometimes there wasn't room. So when you do get to grab onto these people, I think it's really important they understand why. And because I think it's, people forget, as much as you choose them, they choose you. They could get a lot easier jobs somewhere else than working in a startup CPG company who's constantly looking for cash and is bootstrapped and high energy, and you know. So it's important to say why. That, you know, I think it's important to say why they're so special. I think COVID actually really spurred a lot of that, because we never intended to be a remote or partially remote or national brand. I was hoping I'd always hire and recruit locally, and we would have a headquarter office and everyone worked from here and it'd be normal, and it wasn't. So I think creating that culture, one, nationally, two, remotely, it's hard. And the easiest way I thought was, one, touting their success and why they're here. Two, one thing we do and we started doing is we do a welcome box, and it's not a corny one with just a t-shirt and like a notebook, right? It's there's little meaningful trinkets in there. Like there's a whistle because we want you to be a whistleblower when shit's not right, right? There's a cold pack because we believe frozen is awesome. So there's little mementos. And you'd be surprised. Those little things are a long way. It's geared towards as if it's like welcome aboard, like you're going to get on an airplane and there's a little menu, like you're on first class, because you are first class here to me. So I think, those little personalized touches, I put every box together too. I think it's important. Founders don't lose touch. This is the fun stuff. One day it gets really boring and you just go to board meetings and do decks and P&Ls all day, and you don't really get to interact with people and show them why you love them. So I think personalized touches are really important. And then one of the things we do here, which is hard to replicate again at scale and also just with not everyone being at headquarters, is we do try to onboard in person as much as possible, at least for the first week first week in their existence. And we do something called family meal. So I'll either cook or take the team out somehow, partially cooked or some way, and host everyone at my home, because it's one opportunity for everyone to just get to know each other as a company. There's nothing more intimidating than coming into a small brand that feels really, familial and close. And then you're like, hi, friends, So it's a welcoming gesture, a hospitable gesture, and it's been transformational in our business. It's what everyone looks forward to. They demand family meal anytime they come to headquarters. So that's the stuff I got to work through. But no, it's a fun, and again, this is the fun stuff, like, hiring and HR and all this. It shouldn't be the stuff everyone avoids. It should be the stuff that you enjoy.
I agree completely. And Dan and Ibrahim, do you want to bring in, when you first started bringing people in, how did you make them feel part of A Dozen Cousins?
Yeah, first of all, I'll say shout out to Ayeshah, because we do a small subset of the things that she mentioned, but I actually got my notebook so I could just jot down a couple of ideas. So there's some great stuff in there. I'll tell you a couple of things just that are additive. I think there is a little bit of overlap in some of the things we do in terms of welcome materials and that stuff. But one thing we do, which has started to become a little bit of a tradition to us, is just like an icebreaker session. So the two questions we ask everyone who joins the team is, to tell us about their most memorable meal, which is oftentimes like just a really cool way to get to know one another, right? Around like whether it's a family dish or a vacation they've been on or things of that nature. People also share the story of their name. And so, why were they named? How did they get it? So on and so forth. So we have a few of those things that has become, I think, it feels like a tradition, like a growing tradition for us. I also take pride, just to maybe speak from a different angle, in giving people a really clear onboarding to their nuts and bolts of their job, right? So I think Ayeshah did a good job of covering the culture section, but just as important to me is like, do people really understand what their role is, why they were hired, right? So like, these are the problems that need to be solved. These are the key responsibilities. This is what success will look like in 30, 60, and 90 days. This is how you're going to be evaluated by the end of the year. I give a lot of thought to that stuff before we hire people. So then when they join the team, we're just all on the same page. And a lot of times I'll do that. I'll even start to introduce that during their last interview, right? So like, if I know I'm about to give someone an offer, I'll start to get into like, hey, here's what the first 30, 60, 90 might look like, and just make sure they're really signing on and buying on to that. So that's what I would add there, and happy to let Dan go from there.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, these are all great insights. Mine's just really simple, and something that we always do. We do a lunch during the first week that they're there. So whether it's the first day or the first week, take them out to lunch and then bring the rest of their team out to lunch with us. And it's just, we found it's just a great way to kind of break the ice a little bit, get everyone relaxed, and then also just get the new hire a little bit more relaxed, because, one of the things that is hard to remember sometimes is a new hire is nervous. They can be, for sure. It's a new job for them. It's a new role, especially if they're coming, straight out of college or kind of early on in their work career. Doing something like that has just paid dividends for us, and something that we always try and do.
Dan, one thing that I love that you guys talked about, I think it was you or Patrick, is how you guys have socials with your teams every like a few weeks or every month, to really instill those values as well. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. I'm glad you asked. I definitely wanted to mention it. So we do company outings once a month. As the company has grown, we've split the outings into teams so that we still have like production running and all that at any given time. But for the most part, most of the company is there. And we do very simple things. We actually went to Montrose Beach 2 weeks ago, which was awesome. You know, we just buy a bunch of, you know, beer and seltzer and water and, you know, cater a little bit of food or even just grill or bring some food. And they're relatively inexpensive, but they are so awesome. And I think it's the best way for different parts of the company to interact. And it's one of the reasons when we survey our team every quarter, we always get responses about the outings. And, you know, it's not easy to do. Obviously, all our companies are very busy. And as we've grown, we've had to adapt it a little bit to make sure that we're still running throughout, you know, any given day. But it's typically a Friday for a couple hours and super simple, whether it's at a beach. We've done Bussy Woods, which is like a forest preserve in the Chicagoland area. We've even gone to like, you know, one of our team members' houses and just grilled out in the backyard. And it, you know, doesn't sound like much, but honestly, it's great. And not only do I like it, I really do think people appreciate just the fact that, you know, they can sit down and have a meal with me, or they can sit down and have a meal with somebody in production, and kind of brings everyone together at the same level.
And Dan, are you doing this during work hours or after work hours?
No, we do it during work hours. So yeah, the expectation for sure is that, you know, as much as I would love to do it outside of work hours, you know, we do value their time outside of work and want to make sure that they have that work-life balance. So we typically do like Fridays from like 2 to 5.
I love that. I think that's really important because I think a lot of people like have family commitments and other things going on where like they don't want to spend extra unpaid time at work necessarily. And so it's nice to incorporate that with them.
Thank
Awesome.
you. Yeah.
Next topic I want to talk through is really around team structure between full-time hires, contractors, anytime you're using like virtual assistants or like production team members. And so maybe Ayeshah, we can start with you in terms of like how do you kind of view when you bring on full-time people? Are you using contractors? Are you using virtual assistants? How are you kind of thinking about that structure?
Yeah, I mean, it's all around how much money you have, right? I mean, making your dollar stretch as far as you can for the resources that you need when you need them. When we first got started, we relied on a lot of outsourced consulting, contracted support. And it was great for that time, right? Because to be honest, when you really think about it, how much of it do you really need to be a full-time person? It's probably rare that you need all of those roles full-time. So relying and leveraging contracted support, outsourced third-party support, advisory support. We did a lot of that, honestly, up until about, as I said, like 2 years ago. I mean, at the height of COVID, we only had 8 people, and that was from 3 for the first 4 years of our existence, right? Because that's how heavily relied on outsourced support. But as the company grew and the need state grew, it became very evident that you wanted full-time attention and not have to like worry about, you know, did my project get my customer file get moved to somebody else, and now I got to onboard them and start them from scratch. You start to waste a lot of time onboarding third-party support. So we ended up, you know, just making sure that in our race that we did in 2020, that we had a lot of capital in there that was going to be allocated towards just headcount. So this has been in process for quite some time, is getting to the point where we knew the need state that we were going to be in, and to hire those strategic folks over time. I've never relied on a lot of virtual stuff. I mean, maybe it's a fault of being type A and half Asian, but I like to do everything myself because it's faster at times. So the VA thing is like, it takes me just as long to describe it on a digital chat than it just if I did it or assigned it to somebody else who was available. So I have not actually had a lot of success with those types of environments. But I will say one of the things we leveraged really strongly very early on too has been internships. And I think people forget about those. Yes, it's temporary and it's sad to think about, but it's incredibly valuable because these are agile people who are hungry and intelligent in ways that we are not, and just eager to absorb and do something and prove themselves. So we've had a lot of great success with intern and externships as well.
Curious, how are you sourcing those interns? Are you just kind of putting it out to your network? Are you going through universities?
A lot of both. And in fact, we recently also did a partnership with an inner city school here in Baltimore that has a formalized innovation center and an externship program for entrepreneurship. So these are high school students. They can't work full time, but we've seen some incredible results with the people that we've given these opportunities to, because it's, to me, important as a person of color who grew up in the projects and not having access to seeing how the real world worked. I wished when I was 10 I saw this, because I might have done a lot of things differently. So providing that access really early has been important, and we've had incredible success with externs from there. We've also had a lot of word of mouth, and in fact, I will tell you, now that I think about it, we've had a lot of high school externs, like out of high school into college, that realm, more so than college level success. And I'd even say that they were harder working than some of the college students, and more innovative. They were just like, you couldn't tell them that round was round. They were like, no, fuck that, I'm going to show you, right? Like they just think different. It was kind of beautiful because the energy and the approaches to things changed.
I love that. That's really exciting. Most people don't think about that early age. Most kind of go back to like college.
Yeah.
And so that's great that you're kind of bringing the high school age as well, or just after high school. I love that. Ibrahim, how about you? I know you kind of relied on a lot of outsourced help along the way.
Yeah, I think Ayeshah hit that part well. We probably went on the same journey of, in the early years, we were very reliant on outsourced agency part-time assistants. And as the company has grown, we've brought more of those roles in-house. And I think the measurement for us has been pretty simple, which is like, could this be a 40-hour-a-week job, right? Once it reached the point, and maybe less than that, right? But once it was clear to us that we needed one person to be thinking about this all the time and to have that follow through on it, then we would bring that role in-house. And in some cases, those people are still supported by, a little bit of external support. Sales is probably the most obvious, where, we have sales brokers really for every channel that we sell in, but then have, one sales leader who oversees that team. So that's what I would say in terms of, the difference between contract versus full-time. The other thing I'll share, where I think we're probably a little different than the current state, is that all of our team is local in LA. So outside of, our sales team, which is remote, I've just kind of tried to stay committed to being here together in person. I know it's now probably the minority opinion, but I think there's a lot of value in like seeing how people work, seeing what their body language is, knowing their mannerisms, being able to have small talk, being able to ask informal questions. I think there's just a lot of value in that. And we try to be flexible in terms of how long we're together in the office versus giving people flex time. So it's not like, 365 days, 9 to 5 in the office, but I have tried to keep the team local, because I think it enables a little bit of serendipity in terms of the work that we're doing.
I love that perspective. Tina, I'm actually curious. I know you talk with a lot of founders and brands about hiring and kind of when to bring on someone full-time in person versus when to kind of outsource in different avenues about that. Can you kind of talk through what you've kind of heard and how you also help people along with that?
Yeah, so a lot of people say, I'm ready to grow, and a lot of it is because the customer is demanding more. They're having more retailers, they have more complexity. They're doing direct to consumer as well as having a brick and mortar. If they're in tech, they're coding and they're adding just a lot of product features. And I've always said, think about who that customer is. Where are your new revenue coming from? Is it from your same clients upselling and having them buy more? Like, are you actually bringing new products to them? Kind of like Ayeshah is doing. She went from biscuits, which is like, I have my favorite. Everyone has theirs. Mine is the plain, because I can dress it up the way I want. And now she made it hard for me, because now I have the breakfast sandwich, and like that all you can eat convenience and other people liking that more than my own personal recipe. that is interesting. So think about what customer centric is to you. If you're growing by upselling, if you're growing by new channels, you need to deal with that. So let's say you're doing a lot of direct to consumer. You're going to need some data analytics. You need some people who are going to like be responsive to that. If you're focusing on retail, brick and mortar, you are going to need to pay attention to the retailer portals, and you'll need people to be in that operations team and the order management team in just that constant communication. One of our clients, they're in a bunch of different retailers, biggest to small, Walmart, Lowe's, it's one of our case studies. And they just needed to get people back in touch with people. You don't argue with Walmart. You said, yes, Walmart, you are correct. You should take a discount for whatever is, expired. But let's do something positive with that. Let's change your assortment for next week so that it is more appropriate to what you need, more correct by store, and there is less waste all around. That's just a win-win for everybody. So think about what customer centric means for you, and then choose the teams that are going to be, really making an impact on that.
No, that's a really great way to think about it. So next topic I want to kind of mention as well is around org structure and how you start to build that out. Because I remember when building T-Squares, my previous brand and a couple others, was like, okay, I know kind of like sales, operations, maybe finance, but like I see companies with 50 people in finance. I'm like, what jobs do they actually do? Like, do you need that many people? When do you need that many people? And how do you start building out that org structure? And so Dan, as you guys have started to grow Tiesta, like how do you think about your org structure and like how many people in each kind of department and the teams, and like how have you been building that out? Where are kind of the needs coming up?
That's a great question. Honestly, and I think this probably goes for a lot of startups. We probably identify the needs after we really need them, which is good or bad. But I think that's kind of the startup world that we live in. And obviously just trying to save costs. We're always as conscious as we can be to not overhire. And so if we see certain developments in a certain area, whether it be sales or marketing or operations or production, we start to lean on those areas. And a lot of times in terms of like finding new people, we always start by going to our current staff and we say, hey, do you guys know anyone in the space, or maybe somebody you went to school with, or somebody that has, similar values to what you have? And we've had a ton of success with finding people that way. And, of course you have to interview them and do the background checks and all that. But at the end of the day, referrals from your own people are excellent, and it reduces a lot of the work that you would spend typically to find those people out in the open market.
That's great. Ayeshah, I know your team is 28 now and growing. How are you thinking about organizational structure?
Well, I mean, honestly, similar to Dan, right? Sometimes it's like in the line of fire, what's stressing people out, what takes up most time, what do I end up having to do to support somebody else that I'm not the best person to do, but I'm the most reliable because I will do it until I bleed. I don't ask that of anybody else. So I think those are unfortunately some of it. The other thing that we started to do is really focusing on bringing in leadership that can bring or hire for the team that they need, right? So for example, finance, let's take is a great example. I am not a finance person. It is not my core strength. I do not want to be in there. And so when we hired our CFO, she's a beast. So she already was like, I got this. And then she'd be like, you know what? We will never succeed if I have to keep doing this. And it may not be a full-time at first, but it will get up there. Just relying on really experienced people who can tell you it's time, right, to start thinking about those things has been important. And she's built out the finance team accordingly. Similarly in sales, bringing on a strong chief of sales to then say, this is the organization that we need to support the level of growth we're heading towards, and allowing them to help make those decisions. I think it's a hard thing because as a startup or an emerging brand, you think you have to make every hire, and you don't, right? Like at some point, handing over the reins to people that know what to look for beyond culture fit, work ethic, or you have a great resume in sales, I bet you're good, right? Like you don't know, like, right? Like let the people that know hire for that, right? And own that relationship and begin to cultivate their own little micro cultures. It's hard when you're like 10 people because you don't get to see that develop. But I can tell you now with 28 people, it's beautiful to see the ops team being opsy, right? Like they have their own little thing and I don't fit in there and it's okay, right? So it's like, it's those little microcosms to create environments and communities within a community. And it's important because they all get on their own wavelength. They come up with their own SOPs, they come up with their own process, and they all in many ways create redundancy within the system because they all want to help each other. That's important. And so I think as people learn to scale, it's important to think, who can you bring in that's going to create those types of environments long term as well?
That's good to think about, because I know as a founder, sometimes you might think like you don't want redundancy because it means like, why am I paying like multiple people to do the same thing? But from the standpoint of like making sure things don't get lost or things can get covered by someone else, if everything's like so prescribed and if someone's sick or someone unfortunately leaves for whatever reason, you're kind of scrambling to cover for that, right?
Yeah, it's one of the most untalked about things I think in our industry, right? Like people want to work at a startup because it's sexy and glamorous in many ways and fun, right? But you are the only person sometimes. And the risk and reward there is, if you really need the time, who's going to do the job? That's been a big challenge with scale. So we just committed to realizing that there needs to be some level of redundancy in every department. And I think COVID really taught us all that, right? I mean, in good and bad ways, not just the challenge of what COVID presented in terms of supply chain pressure, et cetera. I mean, I knew many people who got COVID and passed away. And if they were on a team and they were the only person, what did that do to the organization, right? So thinking like a big company sometimes is important, and realizing that you can't just put one soldier on the board for one position. There's got to be backups.
One of the things that I've often said is when you hire for a startup, you kind of need that person who can do multiple things and will be scrappy and help the other teammate, because sometimes you are half of a team of the other team. But when people are rolling up their sleeves and they kind of like never roll them back down, that's when you start thinking about they might need someone that they can delegate, someone that they can coach, someone that they can train, and someone who is going to ask them the questions that they're no longer asking. And that might actually be, now you're just doing it the same old way. When you are the leader, you will see that. And sometimes you need to bring people to understand that half of the value that you bring is your commitment and the fact that you're doing it. But the other half is the fact that you have that perspective, you have that experience, and that you can add value to the other areas. So having that redundancy and knowing that sometimes, like, just like your first hire was a Swiss Army knife, you need a couple of those young Swiss Army knives to come in and let people become directors. And by that, start to think about what else do the customers need? What else does the CEO need in order for the company to succeed?
And kind of following that same line of thinking, a little bit different though for Ibrahim, how are you thinking about titles and job responsibilities as you're hiring these first 5 people, right? Because sometimes you meet people, they're like coming in new and they're like, I'm the one doing sales. I want to be like the vice president of sales, right? And have these very lofty titles. But then as your company grows, like maybe they're not the right fit and they're more of a manager level. You need to hire a more strategic vice president to take over. And it's hard to kind of move those titles around. So how are you thinking about titles for people you're bringing in?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think, to your point, when you're the only person in your function, it's like, look, I am the VP, right? I'm the VP and the analyst kind of all at once. And so, what I'll say, my approach has just honestly been to try to think ahead to what does the org chart need to look like 4 years from now or 3 years from now? And like, where would this person slot in? And for me, that's been the most useful framework to make sure that there's room for this person either to grow into the level above them, right? So maybe we hire them as a director and promote them into the VP over time. Maybe we hire them as a manager with a path towards a director. But then also it might be the case that it's just a different person that needs to come in, I think like our marketing team is a good example of that, where, I've been de facto kind of the head of marketing, but at some point we'll bring in a director or a VP to lead that team. And so the team that's in place today is all at the associate and manager level. I think it's important to just cue to people how the organization might evolve over time, what their role in that future org might look like, so that expectations are really clear. everyone's not going to remain the head of their function through scaling, right? And they kind of need to understand that. And I think, communication is always key.
Thank you. And Dan, can you expand on that? You now have 31, so you have had people hired probably above as well as, expanded somebody's team with them and for them.
Yeah, I love this question because I think we've probably made some mistakes over the years with this, and in the sense that we probably gave titles that we didn't need to or shouldn't have. And sometimes it can be a good thing as long as you manage, in my mind, as long as you can manage the expectations accordingly. The thing about titles is, anyone can type in a title on Google and figure out what the average salary is for that title. They can also use that on the resume, which makes them more attractive to a future employer. Over time, we've been a lot more calculated about how we use titles at our stage. Certainly, I think in the earlier days, it can make sense to give a little bit higher title, but what I'd recommend is just level setting with that person when you do give that title and saying, hey, listen, although you have this title, we may not be able to pay you. We won't be able to pay you what the market gives for this type of title, just because we're a small organization. But also explain to them that the benefit is that they can grow with that title and grow into that title. And ideally, they're that person that you have for many, many, many years. So I don't have the right answer to this one, but just a couple of things that we've run into over the years.
Ayeshah, would you like to?
So
Again,
I will comment on it only as a woman.
Please.
I think titles are important to women. We are very strategic and aligned on, to Dan's point, I mean, you may not match from a salary standpoint because maybe a senior VP gets paid a lot of money somewhere. But I pretty much make it clear that, especially for women in leadership who, like myself, I mean, I left a career where I should have probably been a director much earlier than I got to, just because I had a vagina. So I decided that it's really important to listen to the demands of women in the workplace. And a lot of them, it is just about the title. It's all they want. So I'm like, all right, I may only be able to pay you $20,000 less than, what you would get at some big CPG company. But if you're willing to do that and you're willing to take on the roles and responsibilities associated with the title, I'm here for it. I think it's an important, I think we've for too long put a lot of weight behind titles. I've actually found, as we've grown too, we're a very diverse company. 75% of us are women in the executive and leadership levels. I've found that it's actually worse to have multi-scale leadership, because then people do this, because she's a senior leader, but she's a senior director. I'm the VP. I'm a C-suite. Who's on? Then it gets really awkward. And you're just like, who cares? We're all really smart and we're all working on the same problem. What do you want to be today? I was like, anybody want to be CEO today? I'll leave this seat. If it means somebody will take it. So I think it's a antiquated conversation. And I think I'd encourage, obviously I'm not saying that if you're 2 years out of college, you're demanding to be a VP. That's a very different world. But I think with the quality and caliber of roles and responsibilities and the level of risk that being in this industry segment requires, if a title's what people want to get them in here and to prove themselves, I think it's antiquated to take a look at how does that align with the headcount series GS scheme? Do we need to do that? I mean, I didn't even pay myself for 6 years. So does it matter? I just think having a holistic view about how title impacts who's on first, what title means to diverse workforces, and how much of that really gets tied to pay nowadays are important questions.
Yeah, if I could jump back in on this, just because I think maybe it's towards the end of what Ayeshah just said that I think is important. I do think it's important to understand why people value the title, right? And there are some times when the reason they want the title is actually like a red flag to me. You know what I mean? Because at a large company, a lot of times what a title signals is the number of people who will report to me, the type of work that I no longer need to do, and of course compensation. And it's like I try to orient the conversation around like growth and prestige at a startup. It just looks and feels very different than how it looks at a large CPG company. And I started my career at a large CPG company, so I can remember, you know, working 5 years to become a manager, and that was like the biggest thing in the world to me. And now the reality is it's just not that important. And I know that now we're gaining value from like what does your network look like now a few years ago. So just really trying to orient people around the right things to value and what you can actually deliver as a young company.
I think one of the best quotes on that came out, I think today or yesterday, from Bracken Darrell. Bracken is the CEO of Logitech and was formerly at two big CPGs, Procter and Gillette. I worked with him there. And he says, if you can understand that you can impact the company from any role in the company, and he was saying this in big roles, that is really important. And that is really what's more important, is if you can bring your talent and you can bring your brain and make a positive impact, at the end of the day, if you're working with the right people, that's going to be enough. All of that said, there is an entire marketplace out there, and we're all putting our names and titles on LinkedIn. To give an example of a company that learned something along the way, Procter & Gamble, 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, everyone looked like they were having a promotion on LinkedIn. And the reason why is they actually level set all of the titles to the market, because everybody was coming out of Procter as a group manager that people didn't even know what that meant, and getting promoted into like a senior director or maybe even a VP. And it was just kind of silly, right? I remember not being picked into a professional association. And my friend who graduated the same year for me, also from Babson, said, well, that's ridiculous. Your budget is 10 times my entire company's revenue. That was just my budget within Gillette. So there is some ridiculous rules out there. And as long as you stand on the side of having your team be successful within the team and with whatever is important to your marketplace, right? Whether it is for you to recruit, whether it is for your people to have conversations with the right potential client, potential partners, just make the choices that are right for you in that situation. And it's not a rule from 5 years ago. Things have changed so much right now.
That's so key. And one thing that's really interesting, I'll share a article in the comments here, and I'll put those in the notes as well. But Robert Craven with Find the Way of Ventures wrote a piece about titles and what role they play within the company, to really help level set and have conversations around what a manager means or what a vice president means. And it can change depending on the company, but as all of you have kind of mentioned, it's important to set that expectation so that people understand that the VP role doesn't just mean you're the only person doing the job, but it comes with a set of different responsibilities. And within the journey of the organization, you also want to match the skill sets of your employees with the roles and responsibilities that they have, because some people like keeping their hands in everything, and that person might not be a great vice president of a 100-person company because they need to be more strategic and long-term thinking. And so just kind of, as you mentioned, like level setting those things and understanding that roles and responsibilities will change and grow and expand as the company expands, I think is super key. So we have a couple minutes left, and I think there's a couple questions I want to get to. So the first is, what are your biggest hiring mistakes that you've made? Could be on practice or your process or an individual, without naming any names. And I'll kind of let this be open. Dan?
I was waiting for this question. The number one piece of advice that I have is to do background checks. And the reason why I say that is we did have a hiring situation where we ended up bringing somebody on at a pretty decently well-paid role that completely falsified his entire resume. We didn't check references properly, didn't do a background check. And eventually we figured out that he was, I think they call it moonlighting, where you're working multiple jobs at a time. that was a really damaging hit to us, not just from a financial perspective, but also just for the rest of the team, because people start asking questions. Where is that individual? What are they doing? What are they contributing? It was a huge lesson. And I'm not the kind of person that really believes that, you need to look too far into somebody's history, but background checks are there for a reason. And also just for the safety of your employees, and for everyone that works there. And so you owe it to the rest of your team that you bring in people that are safe and people that are honest and that are doing the job that they should. So that's all I'll say.
And Dan, with that, are you doing those background checks yourself, or do you have like a third-party company that you recommend?
We do it through our HR company, our PDO, but they're really inexpensive. I think they're about $40. Best $40 you'll ever spend.
I'll go quickly. I'll say, and I alluded to this in one of my early answers, just really understand what your team members value, right? And what are their goals. I think if your goals are misaligned, there's nothing you can do as an employer that will ever satisfy that employee, and vice versa. There's nothing they can do as an employee that will ever satisfy you as an employer. So you are kind of setting yourself up for failure. I want to be intentionally vague so that I don't, we have a small enough team that I don't want to take shots at individual people, right? But it's like, there's just some people, once they got on the job, it was clear, like, okay, if this is just a step on the ladder, for this person, that's very different than other people who, they really want to be on the journey to build something, right? And so that's what I would say for that.
I guess along with those lines, are there any things that you do when you're onboarding to trial run employees? Do you bring them on like a 90-day probation period? Is kind of open to anyone, like to make sure that they're a good fit and then you can part ways early, or do you have any systems in place for that?
So we have a motto now, because we've learned the hard way so many times, and it's hire slow and fire fast. Gratefully, we've never had to fire fast, but hiring slow has been the new mantra. I really believe, because it's such an integral, anyone you're bringing into an emerging brand as a foundational team member, you need to date them, right? Like, you got to get to know them, right? Before you invite them into this marriage, right? You really got to know, are they going to be ride or die for you, right? And the bigger thing too, that I've discovered over the course of time, I want to build a legacy brand, right? I want to build a brand that's here, hopefully after me. That's a very different goal than about 90% of the CPG world, right? It's like, gonna get to 20 million, close this thing. Like, I want to get out, right? There's closers and then there's stabilizers. And you got to know where people fall on that spectrum quickly. And it's hard to suss out. So one of the things we've done too recently is we do a lot of case study work. So we actually formulate 1 to 2 case studies, and we ask people to apply their knowledge in such a way that you understand how they think and how they would approach that problem. It's been transformational in our hiring. And at first we thought, oh, no one's going to sit here and do this. If they're hungry and they want the job, they're going to, you're just going to be blown away, right? So it's actually a good problem to have. You have too many people that did incredible case study responses. And then I'm a big advocate of what we started doing with managers and above is we do roundtable interviews. So once they've passed myself and my business partner, Ross, we do a roundtable with all of our management team, because if any one of them picks up a red flag, it's going to be a good indication there's going to be discord over time, right? So if they all sign off on it, to me, it's a good indication that everyone can get along and it's going to be a great partnership over time.
Awesome. I love that. And then to close out in the last couple of minutes, I'd love for everyone to just touch on quickly how your role has changed as the CEO of a growing company.
I can start with just what's the same, and I can go from there. Like, to me, number one job, set the vision for the brand and the business, right? What are we doing? Number two is to determine how we allocate resources, right? What are the important priorities? What are we not going to do? And then the third is to bring in the appropriate talent. And then I would say there's 100 other things that I started doing or stopped doing or hired and delegated. So I won't list out those other 99.
I'm going to piggyback on that for sure. A lot of what Ibrahim said is absolutely correct, at least for me. It's learning just to let go of the reins a little bit and let some of those managers right under you do what you need them to do. And it takes time, and it's really hard as an entrepreneur, as I'm sure all you guys deal with. Also, we all want control, but at the end of the day, there's just only so much time that we have. And so, you can always start small, and then over time, you build that level of trust with the managers below you, and hopefully let them manage and just drive that vision home.
Yeah, similar to what the guys have stated, I'd say the biggest thing too that I think has changed is you start out in this world as a founder CEO, as a firefighter, and then you end as a crystal ball magician, right? Like you're literally just spending most of your time thinking long-term strategy. Where are we going to be? How do we get there? That's a very different place than, did that order get out? Do I need to go pick it up myself? Right? Like it's a very different world. So, I'd say that's the evolution that I've personally experienced. And I also think all the things I hated when I was young, working in big corporate, like all the systems and the processes, the software, and you're just like, oh, why do I need to fill out an expense authorization? This situation. Now I'm like, oh my God, we need expense authorizations, guys. Like it's like those little things start to make a lot of sense. So I spend a lot of time now thinking about systemically how we can run better, be more predictive in responses just internally in the back office than ever before, so that people aren't wasting time doing, 2 hours on an expense report, right? There's got to be better ways of doing things and becoming more efficient.
Excellent. Thanks so much for our panelists for joining us. Tina, any final words?
So the one thing that I see incredible founders do is eventually consider their world to be much bigger than their own company and their own community. And I would just like to let people close out with the words of, how did Project Potluck come about? What's the impact? And Dan, the foundation. So if I start with Ayeshah and Ibrahim, congratulations on what you've accomplished. How did that start? And is that what you're spending some time on now?
Project Potluck has been transformational for us as brands, as leaders, because there's been a lot of exposure to the need. So the outbound communications from all of the membership, and even not just membership, just allies, like many of you may be in the room, has been astronomical, because it's probably the first visible time that people have been able to clearly state that this is something people have wanted but had no idea how to express. So it's been transformational for us in terms of providing that voice, that stage, that opportunity to BIPOC leaders in the industry, but it's also been foundational for myself and Eve as CEOs, because there's been a lot of artificial weight that's been put on us as representatives of the industry, and then also representatives of people of color. I can't tell you how many calls I field every day. I'm always going to take that call, by the way. I don't care. I will always take that call. But I take so many calls now from people of color or allies who are looking to help people of color. So I now have a second job, right, in making sure that need is being met as best I can. If you are not a member or an allied member, please, please, please join potluckcpg.org. We are kicking off a new community circle program, so an online virtual community. We have community events and parties for members. There's so many amazing things happening, and a big push at Expo East if you guys are going to be there.
Wonderful. And Dan, you've done some wonderful things with the foundation, including the Warmth Project in Chicago. Can you share how that came about?
Yeah, for sure. First and foremost, if you guys get a chance, definitely check out Project Potluck. It's unbelievable what they're doing. It's truly the future of food. It's truly the future of entrepreneurship and CPG. Things like this are what's going to advance our industry, I really believe. At the foundation, there's two things that we really do. Mainly, one is we build water wells in Nigeria, not for farming, but to provide the people that do our farming better access to clean water for cooking, cleaning, drinking. We built 3 water wells thus far. Very proud of that. Once we started getting up and running on that, we started the Tiesta Tea Foundation, which is a nonprofit. And the main reason we actually did that was that we could bring in donations that were tax-free or tax deductible, which has been huge for us in terms of just bringing in more money into these causes. And the last is spread the warmth. So what we do is we hand out hats, gloves, basically what we call warmth kits So bags of just all those different things and some dry food items. And we go out in the streets of Chicago. We go to all the shelters. We partner with them, and we take one day a year. Our whole staff does it. And in addition to that, we get the community involved, and it's unbelievable. And you know, the one, I'll kind of leave it with this story. I'll never forget one of our newest employees, I think about 2 years ago. She saw us packing up the kits as she was leaving the warehouse. She was a production employee, or still is. And she kind of pulled me aside. She goes, I am so proud to work for a company that does something like this. And I was taken aback, like my breath was literally taken away. And, you know, not only are these things great just overall to help out these underserved communities, but it's great for your team. It's great for team building. It's great for your values. It's great to have to build a good culture. So something that we really try hard to maintain and grow over the years.
Wonderful. The only closing words I have is echoing what you've said. You are nothing without your team. As a founder, you have the fortune of building your team and creating that team, and definitely make that an interesting part of your job, because it is key. And then remember that especially for anyone that is young, this is their first job or their second job or the first one that they consider a career. They're going to be so incredibly proud of that job, and, you know, their email address and the fact that they have a business card or whatever the trappings are, the swag of the day. It is something that is so important to us. We spend a third of our day with the people that we work with. So founders definitely have the way of impacting a lot of different jobs. You don't not only create jobs, but you really impact jobs. And my hat's off to both of you. And to Ibrahim.
Thanks so much, Tina. Thanks so much, Dan, Ayeshah, and Ibrahim for joining as our panelists.